Hello my sweet friends, welcome back. I thought since we hit the halfway mark through the year, now would be the perfect time to just sit and talk about the best books I've read this year. Like all of my favorite books up until this point. I was just going to talk about my 5-star reads, but I haven't had that many, so I thought we could start off talking about the 5-star reads that I've had this year, but then also talk about my 4.5-star reads because they are also just incredible reads that I've had so far, and I still want to talk about them. I actually can't hear very well right now. I thought I would go in order of when I read the books. So the first 5-star that I had this year was The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. I think I read this in January. This was my book club's pick for January, so I read it alongside 3 of my best friends. And you'll actually see throughout this video that there are a few book club picks that have made it into my favorite books of the year, which is just the best thing ever. But this is my second Kristen Hanna book and my second 5-star read from Kristen Hanna. I haven't read any more since this because I feel like I need to emotionally recover from her books and have like at least a few months in between them. I probably should read another one soon, but I feel like this one is one of her most well-known and most well-loved books, and for good reason. Like, it is one of those books that has a lot of hype, but I feel like deserves a lot of hype as well. This book is set during World War II and we're following 2 sisters who live in France, and we just see the different experiences they have during World War II, and we see how the different choices they make lead them down very different paths. So you're following like 2 different stories about these 2 different women, but they both just experience so much, and even though they're doing completely different things, both of their lives are so extremely difficult. I feel like this just gave a perspective to some people's experience of World War II that I just hadn't even thought of before, because in this book we see how the German army took over France and what that meant for the people living there who weren't even soldiers or who weren't fighting in the war. They were just living at home, basically just trying to survive the war and just wait it out, but there was so much happening to them too, because their villages and their towns were taken over by the German soldiers, and there's so much that went into this, and the story is extremely heartbreaking, but I just love how deeply I was able to understand these women and feel 1%, maybe not even that, of their experience because of this story. And I feel like it just reminded me how inspiring women are and how they just seem to be able to survive anything and everything, no matter how heartbreaking it is. But yeah, it is very sad. It is very difficult to read at times. I wouldn't go into this if you want a happy, light-hearted story, but it is beautiful and it is important, and I'm so glad that I read this. It's one of those books that I just don't think will ever really leave my mind. My second 5-star of the year was Emily Wilde's Compendium of Lost Tales. This is the 3rd and final book in the Emily Wilde series. I love this series with my whole heart. Every book in this trilogy has been 5 stars for me, so I did go in kind of expecting this to be an incredible read for me, but I wasn't let down. I wouldn't say this is my favorite book out of the trilogy. I think my favorite is the first one, but this year I actually reread book 1 and book 2 before going into this one and just had such a fun time reliving Emily and Wendell's stories. This is like a cozy fantasy trilogy. It is very feel good. It is very silly goofy. The series follows Emily Wilde, who studies fairy and folklore, and in the first book you're watching her as she's trying to complete her encyclopedia of fairies, and she finds herself in just a lot of very precarious situations. And we also have Wendell, who becomes a very important character over the series as they build a very unlikely friendship and eventually something a little bit more. I wouldn't say go into this series if you're looking for like a romance book, because the romance is very, very small and very, very subtle, but it is just so fun because you are just like clawing at the door for crumbs of romance, so when you get it, it just feels so satisfying. But I just love reading about Emily and Wendell and the adventures they go on and the different creatures and folk that they meet. It is very cozy. It isn't very high stakes. Some people think it's boring. I think it's very fun and very comforting. But yeah, I love this series so much. Like, I can't help but smile when I talk about it. And the covers are just everything and more. This is like the one fantasy world that I think I could survive in because it just feels very low stakes, and I appreciate that. Next up we have Glow of the Everflame. This is probably my favorite fantasy book that I've read so far this year, and probably just in a long time in general. Like, I want more books that feel like this. If you have any suggestions for books that might give me a similar feeling to this, like, please let me know, because I read Spark of the Everflame at the end of last year. I gave it like a 4.25, which is the first book in this series, if you're wondering. This is the second book. This was 5 stars. I've also read the third book, which is called Heat of the Everflame, and that was a 4.5 star read for me. So this series has just been so fun. I feel like it's just very well-rounded rounded. It has romance, it has politics, it has great world building and very interesting magic systems, also really good found family. Like, it just has everything that I want in a fantasy book, and I really appreciate that. I feel like this year I just haven't found another fantasy book that I've loved as much as this one, so it is a well-deserved 5-star read. It was just so much fun, and like I said, it just has everything you would want. I love the romance in this. It feels like it has enough like depth and it has enough yearning, but it also has that more like witty banter side to it as well. Also, part of this book is set in a castle, and I loved that part of the book. I feel like it's one of those series that I could already go back and reread, even though I didn't read it that long ago, and I am on my hands and knees begging for the next book in the series because I need it immediately, and I don't even know if we have a release date yet, so I guess I'll just be patiently waiting for the next book to come out, but probably not so patiently. The next book that I rated 5 stars was The Conditions of Will by Jessa Hastings. I think about this book so often. It was such an easy 5-star read for me. I don't have the physical copy with me because I've lent it out, but this book follows Georgia Carter. She doesn't live near her family, but she finds out that something bad has happened, like a bit of a family emergency. So she goes back to her hometown and her childhood home to just kind of be with her family and deal with this situation. But we very quickly learn that her family is so messy. The family is quite well off, quite comfortable. They live in a beautiful house and they live in a town where everyone knows everyone's business and everyone is just extremely judgmental. And then there are 4 siblings, one of which is Georgia, but the dynamic between her and her siblings is just so interesting. If you like reading about family dynamics or like messy families, you have to read this book because each sibling is so incredibly different and they each just have such a story, and some of them have kind of, I guess, followed the route of a lot of people that live in that hometown and kind of like checked off the boxes that people have expected them to check off, while some of the siblings have just kind of left and lived a completely different life and the family is not very happy about it. And I think something that was so interesting to me is just seeing how each member of the family, or each sibling in particular, was so deeply affected by other members of the family and how much your family shapes you into who you are, for good or for bad. And whilst I would say the family dynamic is the most interesting part of this book, at least to me, there is also a huge romance component because when Georgia Carter arrives home to be with her family, her little brother has brought along his sponsor. Her little brother is an addict, and so his sponsor has come along. Obviously, it's a very vulnerable time with their family going through something quite difficult, so his sponsor has come along to, I guess, help with that situation. But the sponsor is Sam Penny, and Sam Penny is just a really emotionally intelligent man, which we love to see. He's also very handsome, very witty, a very good listener as well, and Georgia definitely gets a crush pretty immediately, but it's much more layered and complicated than that. And the story is just so much more than anything I've described. I've really just scratched the surface of what this book is, but I just thought it was absolutely fascinating. It made me cry, it made me laugh, it made me swoon. Like, I feel like it did everything I wanted it to do, and I loved it. The next book that I rated 5 stars was Sunrise of the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. This is the newest book in the Hunger Games world and the second prequel in the Hunger Games world. So if you don't know where this book kind of fits in, we have the original Hunger Games trilogy, which follows Katniss and her experience in the 74th Hunger Games. But then we have our prequel novel, so we have The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which follows President Snow and kind of his backstory and how he became who he was. And that book is set during the 10th Hunger Games. And this book here follows Haymitch as the main character, and we see his experience in his Hunger Games, which is the second quarter quell, which is the 50th Hunger Games. So this takes place 40 years-ish after The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, but still 24 years before the original Hunger Games trilogy. So right in between those other books that we already have. And this was fascinating to me. It gave everything that I wanted it to give. I feel like reading about Haymitch's story was so interesting to me. I feel like it filled in a lot of gaps that we had in our knowledge of this world and of the characters that we later find out more about. And I also feel like it laid a lot of the groundwork for the revolution that we see later in the series. So I feel like this book was a really interesting experience. I felt so connected to the characters that we met in this book, and I just think Suzanne Collins is a mastermind. A lot of people say that she only writes when she has something to say, and that is a very interesting concept when you look into it. And I'm not gonna lie, I do hope we get maybe at least one more book in this world. I'm not sure if we will. I feel like there's a lot of discourse about these books and this world and what Suzanne Collins is going to do, but I think it would be really interesting to have at least one more character story. I would love a book on Plutarch, personally. But anyway, I loved this book. It was a 5-star read for me. It made me feel like I was 12 reading The Hunger Games for the first time, and for that reason alone, it would have been a 5-star read, because anything that can make me feel like a kid again, even just for a moment, I feel like that's a feeling that we are all looking for at least a little bit. So obviously this story is heartbreaking and very, very sad, but in terms of nostalgia, this was incredible. And my most recent 5-star is Anne of Green Gables. I feel like I've talked a lot about this recently because I just loved it so much. I also don't have a physical copy of this one yet, but I'm hoping I will get a copy soon. I read this on my Kindle. I downloaded it a while ago, but I just like hadn't got around to it, and then in June when I was overseas I picked it up and it was just so good. I feel like dumb recommending Anne of Green Gables. Like literally everyone knows about this book, and a lot of people read it like as a child, and now I'm 27 reading it for the first time. Like I am extremely late on this bandwagon, but I'm so glad that I finally got on it because I just had so much fun. If you just want something wholesome and sweet and extremely comforting, you need to pick up this series because Anne is just so likable, even though she is kind of annoying. Like you can't help but fall in love with her, and I feel like I just keep falling in love with all of the different side characters that we spend time with. I feel like the town that she lives in is just so cute. It feels like the original Stars Hollow to me. Like I feel like all of the characters that live in Avonlea have such like a stereotype about them. Like they're all just such a caricature almost of a specific kind of personality, and I mean that in the best way possible. I just love reading about Anne and her adventures and all of the mistakes that she makes and the like silly situations she ends up being in, but also like seeing her build friendships with different people and just like growing up and just experiencing life. I don't know, I just love being in that world, and I'm so glad that there are so many books in the series for me to continue just like living in that world and pretending I'm in this beautiful town in Canada with these incredible green landscapes. I just love it so much, and I definitely want to continue reading the rest of the series. I read Little Women for the first time last year, and that was just such a comforting, lovely experience to me, and I feel like reading Anne of Green Gables has kind of given me a similar sort of feeling. So if you liked one, you may like the other. They are obviously different stories, but they just give that beautiful girlhood, coming of age, wholesome vibe. I love Anne of Green Gables. I do. Okay, I am going to escape a little out of this because I am extremely overstimulated, but I've committed. So those are all of my 5-star reads so far this year. So I have had 6 total, which is like 6 5-stars in 7 months. Not too bad, could be better, but I do have my pile of 4.5-star reads sitting in front of me, which I definitely want to talk about because a lot of these were so close to being 5 stars, and I love all of these books so much, so I'm excited to talk about them. And obviously I recommend all of them, so if you haven't read any of my 5-star reads or my 4.5-star reads, you got to get on that because these are all the best of the best in my opinion. Again, starting in the order in which I read them, we have Vardasia by Lynette Noni. This is the last book in the Medoran Chronicles, which is a YA fantasy series. Definitely an older series, and it feels like an older series, but in a good way. This is the last book in that series. I had so much fun reading the Medoran Chronicles. It's about a girl who is just like a normal teenage girl, and then she randomly, accidentally steps into Akane, which is this magical school, kind of like Hogwarts, I guess. It's similar in the sense that there is Earth with normal people, but some people have magic, and the people who don't have magic have no idea this exists, but the people who do have magic have to go to a school and learn how to use it and learn how to use their gifts, and they all have these different powers and different gifts that they can cultivate and learn how to use at this school. So in the first book, that is kind of the storyline that you're following, but obviously as the books progress, you just get so much deeper into the world, and there are so many layers to it. We also have a villain who is kind of consistent throughout the whole series. I think there's only one book in the series that I gave 5 stars, which I think is the 3rd book, which that book was so good. There's a bit of a time traveling element and also dragons in that one, and that was just so good. But I read most of the series last year. I just finished off the last book in the series this year. But yeah, such a fun series. I completely recommend it, especially if you're looking for a bit of a nostalgic YA fantasy series that has like quite a few books, so you can really like dive in and kind of get consumed by it a bit. But yeah, I loved my reading experience of this series in general. Next up we have The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. I read The 7 Year Slip when that one came out, and then I read A Novel Love Story when that came out, but I had never gone back to read her earlier release, which is this one, The Dead Romantic, so I decided to do that this year because I love The 7 Year Slip. I loved a novel love story, so I thought, hey, I need to go back and read The Dead Romantics, and I'm so glad that I did because it was such an incredible read. Ashley Poston books are very interesting because they have a bit of an element of like magical realism or an element of magic to them, and this one follows a girl who is a ghostwriter. She has a deadline for a book that she has supposed to have written, which she has not done, and she has this new editor and he's kind of grumpy, and then something bad happens to someone in her family, so she has to fly back to her hometown to deal with that. And while she is in her hometown, her new grumpy editor shows up as a ghost, and now he is haunting her. Yes, that is the storyline. It is so odd, but it is so well done. It's just like a story I could never come up with on my own. It feels quite unique, but it still has those really fun like rom-com elements to it. I just love Ashley Poston's brain and the way that she writes. I think she just does such a phenomenal job at writing these like slightly random, weirdly magical but beautiful rom-coms that always have quite a bit of depth to them too. But yeah, if you want to read about a ghost writer who ends up having a ghost editor haunting her and maybe potentially falling in love, check this out. Next up we have The Favourites by Lane Fargo. I'm a little bit confused because I was looking back over my reading journal and I obviously put all my ratings and all of my different data in my reading journal, and in some spots in my reading journal I've given this 5 stars, but in some spots I've given it 4.5. So I don't even know what my final rating on this is, but it's at least a 4.5 star, if not a 5 star. This was another book club pick by my book club and we all really enjoyed it. I would say this is just like a general fiction book, I guess. Our main character is a girl called Katerina, and it is her dream to be the best ice dancer in the world. She wants to go to the Olympics, she wants to be the best of the best, and she will stop at nothing to make that happen. And we follow her throughout a lot of her life. We meet her when she's a very young girl and she kind of gets this dream, and we really see every step of the journey as she tries to achieve this dream. But as an ice dancer, she has to have a partner, and so we meet Heath Rocker, who is her partner. She meets him at a really young age and they start being ice dancer partners from a very young age, but we just see how their relationship changes as they get older, and it becomes so much more complicated than that and very, very messy. And we see as Katerina really struggles with this idea of, what do I love more, like certain people or my career and my dreams, and what would I sacrifice in order to get these certain things that I want. It is just such an interesting story. It is such an interesting dynamic. I have no interest in figure skating, in ice dancing, in anything like that, but I could not put this book down. It felt a little bit similar to a Taylor Jenkins Reid book. It almost felt a bit like Carrie Soto, but obviously replace tennis with ice dancing. And again, still a very different story, but just that idea of a woman who knows what she wants and won't stop at anything in order to get it, but you also have an element of romance and friendship and these dynamics between Katerina and her coaches. There are just so many different elements to it, and like I said, it's just messy, but in the best way possible. I think this would be a great book if you're in a slump and you need to get out of it, because it was just one of those books where I was like, I need to know what's going to happen. I can't put the book down. And you also get to see a few different perspectives and like what other people thought were happening at certain points in time versus what was actually happening at certain points in time, which is always just really interesting. Kind of gives like Daisy Jones elements in that way because it has this like interview style to it at certain points. But yeah, this was just such a unique book. I feel like I've never read anything like it, and I wish I could go back and read it for the first time. My next 4.5 star read was Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry. I've seen people calling it Great BBL, and I really love that. I think I wanna join in on that. But anyway, I feel like this has been a bit of a hit or miss for people. Some people love it, some people don't. I am one of the people who really, really loved it. It's not my favorite Emily Henry. It's not in my top 3, but I did have a really good time with it. If you don't know what this one is about, we are following Alice, who is a writer, and she really wants to write Margaret's life story. I guess like a memoir type of thing. Margaret is a lady who used to be very, very famous. She came from quite a famous family. She was a socialite. She married a rock star. She had this really interesting life, and then she just disappeared. And Alice has found her and asked her if she could help her write a memoir. But when she turns up to Margaret's house to start writing her life story, she realizes that she is actually up against this guy called Hayden, who is also a writer and technically a bit more successful, a bit more established in the author space. And Margaret has decided that she is going to choose between them. She's going to give them like a month-long trial period, and whoever's work she likes better, she will work with that person to write her memoir. And obviously, as I'm sure you can guess, knowing Emily Henry, there is a bit of a romance that ensues clues, but alongside that we're almost getting a bit of a past and present timeline, where in the past timeline we're learning about Margaret's life and what it was like being a socialite. How did her family become this really well-known family? What was it like being married to a rock star, and everything that came along with those things. So I thought this was just really interesting. It was a little bit different than a typical Emily Henry book. I liked that we had a romance, but then we also were learning about Margaret's backstory and her life. And I think the only reason this wasn't a 5-star read for me was because I think we were doing these two separate things. Neither of them got done perfectly, in my opinion. Like, both of them I just wanted a little bit more from. I wanted a little bit more from Margaret's story. I wanted a little bit more from the romance. And that was honestly my only critique. I loved the writing. I really liked the characters. I thought both storylines were really interesting, but I just wanted a little bit more. I honestly think if this book was even just a little bit longer, I could have gotten that. But anyway, that's my only critique, and that's the only reason it wasn't a 5-star, but I really, really enjoyed this. Next we have The Night and the Moth by Rachel Gillig. This was so good, and honestly I didn't expect to like this as much as I ended up liking it. I believe this is an adult fantasy book, but it also has a romance in it as well, and I just thought the world building and the storyline and the magic system was just so interesting and unique in this book. I feel like because it is such a unique storyline and fantasy world, it is a little bit difficult to explain, but basically we're following our main character. We know her as Six, and she is a diviner, and I would say I imagined it almost like a nun who lived at a nunnery and was devoting a certain amount of years to service. Obviously she is not a nun, but that is what I imagined in terms of the vibes. Each of the diviners have to devote 10 years of service to being a dreamer, and being a dreamer kind of means they're telling the future for people who come in and request that service. It is a lot more complicated than that. I've explained that terribly. You'll understand it a lot better when you read it, but basically we're following Six, and she is coming to the end of her service, but then suddenly some of the other diviners start going missing, and she's like, what is going on here? So she teams up with a knight and they try and find out what is happening. Again, I've explained that so poorly compared to the actual storyline. Like, it's just got so many more layers to it than that, but I feel like it's one of those books where it's best to go in with as little information as possible and just experience it for yourself. It's very atmospheric, but then it has really funny elements to it too, and it's so interesting because the things that are happening are quite serious and somber, but then there'll be like a sarcastic comment or a really silly situation. There's a character, like a side character, who creates such comedic relief, and I love him. Like, you can't help but fall in love with him even though he's so annoying. And I'm just so intrigued to see what the next book in this series is going to be like, because it ended so well and I just haven't stopped thinking about what's going to happen next. But I really liked this and I really recommend it. The next book I'm going to talk about is One Golden Summer by Carly Fortune. This was absolutely amazing. The perfect summer read. This technically takes place in the same world as Every Summer After, but I personally don't really think you need to read that in order to read this. But this story follows Alice. She is a photographer, but she kind of feels like she's lacking inspiration recently, and her grandmother has recently gone through like a surgery and she is recovering from that surgery. And so Alice is kind of like, why don't I go spend a summer at the lake house with my grandma? We haven't been there in so long. I feel like it'll help me feel inspired again, but also be great for my grandma. So they head out to this lake house, and Alice quickly meets Charlie, and Charlie has been living on the lake for a long time, and he comes off as quite arrogant and cocky, a bit of a flirt, and at first Alice really doesn't like him, but they end up spending a lot of time with each other. And Alice also has a bit of like a bucket list situation that she wants to do for that summer, and so they kind of start completing it together, and it is just the most atmospheric summery read. Like, it just makes you feel like you're sitting in a bikini on a floaty in a pool in the middle of summer. But I think the thing that I loved most about this book is that Alice is either at the end of her 20s or maybe her early 30s, I forget which one, but she kind of wants to have a summer where she feels like a teenager again, because like, don't we all want that? Don't we all want to kind of relive our favorite summer from our teenage years? Like, I feel like we all have one summer in our mind that is so nostalgic for us, where we just had the best summer ever. I have one in my brain where I just feel like I just lived, and Alice and Charlie successfully do that. Like, they kind of have a summer that they would have had when they were teenagers, even though they're in their like late 20s, early 30s. And as a reader, it kind of feels like you get to experience that kind of summer as an adult. And that was the best part of this book for me. Just that perfect nostalgic summer vibe of no responsibilities, doing everything you just feel like doing, no sense of urgency, probably not even knowing what time it is, just kind of being on the boat, being in the water, going for swims, staying in your swimsuit all day. Like, I love it so much. So this was just such a great read to me. Then we have Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is another book club book for me and my friends, and we all loved it. This one follows Joan, and she is an astrophysicist, I think, and she is one of the first women in this like NASA program, and one of the first women who gets to train to go to outer space. And this is just like everything she has ever dreamed of, but you just see all of the trials and tribulations that she goes through in order to make that dream a reality, and just how hard it is being a woman trying to do that compared to a man. But also it's so much more than that. We see her family dynamic. She has a sister and a niece who she is very close to. They also have such an interesting relationship. We also get to see her fall in love very unexpectedly, at least like for her. She doesn't expect to fall in love in the way that she does. And we also see how that romantic relationship puts her dream career at risk, and what she is willing to do in order to keep her career or keep her romantic relationship. It's very, very interesting, very layered. So much going on. Like, it's not just one thing. I also feel like there is incredible found family in this book in terms of her and her colleagues, and each character in this book just feels so real and so multifaceted. And I feel like being able to see all of these people through Joan's point of view and through her eyes is just the perfect way to see this situation, because I feel like she's very real and honest with how she sees people, but also loves to give people the benefit of the doubt, and I really liked that about her. She's quite like meek. I don't know if shy is the right word, but definitely not arrogant, definitely not cocky, but she also works really hard, and I think that just felt very unique. Like, she felt like a strong female main character without being super obvious about it. I don't know how to explain it. I just feel like you don't see that personality very often as the main character, so I really, really liked that. And I feel like it is one of those books where two people can read it and have a totally different experience reading it, which I loved. And also the ending was just crazy. Really, really recommend this. You do not have to like space at all in order to read this. I was saying to the girls when we were discussing it, I was like, if I read the back of this book in a bookstore and I didn't know who wrote it, I would not pick up this book. I only picked up this book because it was Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I love TJR as an author. Like, I will read whatever she writes. So if the premise of the book doesn't sound that interesting to you, I really encourage you to give it a chance anyway. And if you don't end up liking it, that's totally fine, but I just feel like the premise doesn't do the book justice, so do with that what you will. Finally, we have my last and most recent 4.5 star read, and that is Promise Me Sunshine by Cara Bastone. In this book, we are following Lenny, who is currently grieving the loss of her best friend Lou. It's only been a couple of months since Lou passed away, and Lenny is just drowning in grief. She's finding it very difficult just to live her life, rightfully so. And she's kind of hopping around doing these very short-term nannying jobs because she feels like she can't really commit to a long-term job at her current mental state, but she feels like she can do these short-term things. So while she's at a short-term nannying gig, she meets this guy Miles, who is the uncle of the girl that she's nannying, and Miles just takes an interest in her, and not in a romantic way, but in a like, are you okay kind of way. Like, he just notices that something is off and he just wants to figure it out. And when he finds out that Lenny is just really struggling with her grief, he kind of offers to be a bit of almost like a mentor or like a coach even during this time. He's been through a lot of grief in his life, and he feels like he might be able to somewhat understand what Lenny is going through. And she's kind of like, what have I got to lose? And Lenny also has this list that is full of things that she wants to do to help her live again and just be happy again, essentially. And so her and Miles start completing this list together. So it's a really beautiful story of life after loss and friendship that may grow into something more. But I love that this book didn't feel like a romance straight away. It kind of just felt like we were reading about Lenny's story and her experience going through this grief. And even when she met Miles and even when they became friends, it just never felt like the romance was the most important thing. And I don't know, I just love it when romances are so like natural. Like, it really felt like they went from strangers to friends, and they stayed friends for a really good amount of time, and then it wasn't until much later that they were like, wait, do I like you? And I just feel like it was a very natural progression and just such a beautiful story. It just made me feel at first very sad, but then later very, very happy. So if you want a slow burn romance with a lot of depth, I really recommend Promise Me Sunshine. I also love Ready or Not by Cara Bastone, which I also recommend, and I can't wait to see what she writes in the future. Those are all the books that I have to talk about today. I hope you guys enjoyed just hearing me talk about all of my favorite books that I've read so far this year. I really, really hope that we have some more 4.5 and 5-star reads ahead of us in the rest of 2025. Surely we will, like surely. But if you have any books that you think I might rate 4.5 or above, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear about them. But I love you guys so, so much, and I will see you in my next video very soon. Goodbye.